my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. Hello and welcome to my channel. Welcome to another video from me. Today's topic is going to be, like I said in my community post, about Lilith. Archetypes of Lilith. This is gonna be a really long one. I'm gonna issue this disclaimer or warning right from the beginning. I kept thinking about how I'm gonna organize all this. Like, I have been mulling over this video for, I think, close to 5 days now. And, I just want to say that it started out as a fun idea, with me mostly getting into it because I was thinking about what placements make a sex symbol. That's how I got into it, because it started from this, again, it's one of those things that, I've had like the seed for this video planted in my brain for a very long time, and I kept thinking about, doing more research on this topic for years. Maybe not years, but at least months, definitely. Well, I think without planning it, I've been doing research for years, but I have really been thinking about this topic of, how come some people, and especially when it comes to women, but not just women, because I have gotten into researching this for men as well. But especially when it comes to women, how come there are, so many women who are technically very good looking and, conventionally good looking, even among famous people when you think about it, and throughout history, who maybe were not very well remembered or did not become particularly popular during their lifetimes, and yet then there are other women who, again, maybe were not the best looking, and yet they became massive sex symbols, and everyone, especially men, seemed to go gaga over them and think that they were very attractive. And to the same, in a similar vein, actually the same thing happened with men and how men become sex symbols. So that's how this whole idea for this video started, about, looking for looking for aspects in general. And I am also going to start by saying actually that I already have done a video where I talked about placements in the natal horoscope that show what makes someone attractive and also potentially objectified. And again, I'm going to be linking that video together with any other related videos that I will be mentioning in this one in the video description. So if you're curious to see more details about these topics that I'm going to be mentioning, go ahead and check them out in the video description. And this video is not meant to be some kind of correction to anything that I've said previously. It is a added aspect, right? Because astrology is a game of nuances. So it's not like now that I have discovered some new configurations that show, what makes one physically attractive, especially to the opposite sex. It doesn't mean that the other ones are no longer important. Quite the contrary, they will blend together with these aspects, which, since I have mentioned this, I'm also going to mention this as a giant disclaimer that, of course, as usual, because astrology is a game of nuances, you have to take everything that I'm going to say in this video, and I'm going to exemplify a lot, so you're going to see this as I go along. You're going to see concrete examples of what I'm talking about when I say nuances in individual horoscopes of famous people. But basically, the idea is you always have to look at the full horoscope. So even though, yes, I have looked for some patterns, and I have really discovered some very interesting patterns when it comes to, what makes a sex symbol, what makes one very attractive, especially in the eyes of the opposite sex, gives them a certain animal magnetism, gives them a certain allure, a certain, aura that attracts attention. And yeah, I have found some very interesting patterns, but you always have to take those in the context of the bigger picture of the horoscope of that person. And of course, in line with what I said in that other video, everything still stays, basically. Everything stands that I said in that video. So, for instance, one major aspect that I mentioned that would make, for instance, especially women attractive in the eyes of men was Venus in the Arudha Lagna, or Venus in the Lagna itself. So, and by Lagna I mean ascendant. Also, I should mention again from the beginning that Lagna and Ascendant are the same thing, right? A Rudha Lagna is simply a subtype of Ascendant that shows the image you cast into the world. So it's kind of the way that other people perceive you, but it is not necessarily that connected to who you really are. And again, if you're interested to find out more about the Rudha Lagna, I will be linking my entire playlist in the video description, because I have talked about the Rudha Lagna, including how to calculate it, many times in many other videos. I've also actually done a series where I went through each sign, each one of the 12 signs as a Rudha Lagna and how they play out. Yeah, so again, I'm going to be linking that playlist and you can go and check out all the other information. But yeah, going back to the example, so just to give an example, right, I said, for instance, that if a person, especially women, but also with men, if they have Venus in the Rudha Lagna, it's one of those placements that makes a person very attractive, makes a woman very attractive in the eyes of men. That still stands, but if in addition to that, the woman also has some of these prominent Lilith configurations that I'm going to be discussing, it will make her that much more desirable and that much more of a male fantasy, if you will, or at least gives her the potential to be a male fantasy. Now, of course, whether she chooses to play that card and, make the most of it, or chooses to repress it, that's another story. Of course, every person has free will. Yeah. Just to give you an example, right off the top of my head, Marilyn Monroe is actually that example of the ultimate siren of a woman who had Venus in the Rudha Lagna, and she had a Rudha Lagna in Aries. Venus was sitting there, and she also had Lilith, both in the ascendant and in the second house, aspecting her physical body and her face, making her very physically desirable, giving her that magnetism, that sexiness, and also a very strong presence. Yes. So, just an example right off the top of my head. But yeah. I'm still in the introduction, and I'm like 7 minutes and 50 seconds deep. So as I was saying, I kept thinking about how I'm going to organize this whole thing. I thought about turning this into a series. I don't know. I'll see how many centuries it takes me to record everything I have to say on this topic. And then maybe I will, do it in a separate series, or basically section this into separate audios and make it like a mini series. But what I was actually starting to say in the beginning was, it started out as me looking into the sex symbol stuff, and I kept going deeper and deeper into how Lilith plays out in the lives of individuals, and I came across some really, really heavy stuff that I was, not fully surprised to find, but also, some of it is just downright disturbing. I even saw a pattern that connects, to women being sexualized very early on in life, creating this kind of Lolita sort of vibe, all kinds of stuff. And again, I even got into looking into the horoscopes of potential pedophiles, and kind of saw that a few, the ones that I looked for, the ones that were, some of which, to be honest, were not even really proven to be pedophiles, but they were alleged, throughout history. And I'm not talking about necessarily modern living people. For instance, Tchaikovsky, Lewis Carroll, and both of them, actually, these ones that I could think about right off the top of my head, had Venus Lilith connected to each other. Also, one of them, I think, also had Venus connected to Mercury, which shows a tendency to younger people. But again, I'm not trying to say that Lilith in and of itself is going to create pedophilia or anything like that, heaven forbid, but it kind of makes sense, because Lilith is everything that is taboo, basically. Taboo, it's kind of like a mixture of Pluto and Purva Bhadrapada and a bunch of really dark energies, basically. And it also actually plays out as as Pluto in many ways, in the sense that it creates these like power issues, you know, in the native's life, just as it does in synastry and relationships. And again, I'm gonna open another parenthesis here and mention that I also did a video quite some time ago, I think it's been more than a year, where I talked about Lilith aspects in synastry. And as I was actually, you see what I'm talking about? I'm all over the place because I have like 1,000 different streams of information flowing through my brain at the same time about all the things that I've seen connected to Lilith. And actually just like, sorry, just like a month ago or less, I actually was considering doing a video, but I didn't know how to do it, and I thought it was too controversial, and eventually I just dropped it, because I was looking into the Marilyn Manson drama. And because I heard that he was declared or whatever. I don't think he was declared innocent, actually. I think he settled the case in court. I don't know how many of you know about this. I think I mentioned this in another video that Manson, I mean, you probably know about it. Manson was accused by his former girlfriend and actress, Evan Rachel Wood, for having abused her in a relationship when she was barely, I think, 18 when they were dating. And also together after Evan Rachel, there were a bunch of other women that came forward and accused Manson of accused Manson of like abusive behaviors, like really horrible shit. I actually heard the testimonial of one of them, and I looked into the horoscopes. See what I'm talking about? I'm jumping around. But I looked into the horoscopes of almost, I mean, the ones that I could find. I couldn't find the times of birth of these women, but most of the times the time of birth is not relevant when it comes to looking at Lilith placements, because it's not a fast-moving planet, unlike the moon, for instance. It's not even a planet, actually, but let me not get too much into details. Basically, it doesn't change position, really, from one day to the next. But I looked into the horoscopes of these women who accused Manson of abuse, and really what I noticed was a pretty disturbing theme of him having planets conjunct these other women's Liliths. And I'm pretty sure I also mentioned this. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I wanted to if I didn't. I think I mentioned Manson and Evan Rachel Wood even in that video where I talked about Lilith and synastry. But I was gonna do like a whole separate video about Manson, but whatever. He was eventually declared innocent, but I think he was, so like the women didn't start a trial against him. I think he actually sued his girlfriend for trying to defame him or something like that, but he lost the trial, or they settled it or some shit like that. Anyway, my personal opinion, I know everything is alleged and everything, but just call it female intuition, and based on everything that I've seen about Manson, I think it's 100% true. I can definitely see that he would be the abusive type, based on mannerisms, based on stuff that I have heard and read about him over the years. And I think I mentioned this the last time I talked about this. I'm pretty sure I also mentioned them in the video where I talked about Mars-Pluto aspects, because he also had Mars-Pluto aspects, all right, with Evan Rachel, and I think one of the other women who accused him, at least one other woman. Anyway, and Mars-Pluto is, again, another typical aspect in synastry that shows a tendency towards violence, you know, things getting violent and power struggles and control issues and etc., etc. But anyway, I don't want to turn this video into all about this, but as you can see, I'm digressing. But the bottom line is I started getting into that, right? I started getting into that, and then I noticed how, you know, Manson had his moon, and I'm also going to talk a little bit more about Evan Rachel, and I'm going to get to that eventually in this century, her chart, I mean, because she has a strong Lilith in her horoscope, and I actually looked into this, and he had Moon Saturn conjunct her Lilith. And Moon-Lilith is one of those aspects that really I have noticed, again, since I did that last video. I think I have gathered even more information about how Lilith plays out in synastry. And I've actually seen Moon-Lilith in particular tends to make crazy, tends to make the moon person crazy. And usually as far as I have seen it, especially in dramatic relationships, it tends to be the man that is the moon and the woman is the Lilith. Like the Lilith somehow triggers the shit out of the moon person and triggers possessiveness issues and fear of abandonment and all kinds of like volatility because the moon is about emotions and needs and all this stuff. But whatever, don't want to digress too much. But I've seen a pattern with Manson going for Lilith-themed relationships, and even in his long-term relationship that he has now officially, forgot what her name was, but I remember checking their horoscope, and he has Venus conjunct Lilith with her. Pretty sure that she's the Lilith again. And also in his natal horoscope, he has a grand trine between Lilith, Venus, and Mars, which is particularly telling for an artist because, you know, Venus shows your sense of aesthetic. I've talked about this in other videos, and I'm sure that many of you already know about this because I kept repeating it. But yeah, and also another parenthesis, Lana Del Rey also has Venus conjunct Lilith. So, and yeah, she also has Venus in Barney conjunct Lilith. Talk about dark themes, you know. Yeah, again, I've done videos where I talked about the nakshatras, not all of them. Yes, I have to continue that series as well, but I have done a video where I talked about the Venus rule nakshatras, including Barney. Again, I will be linking the nakshatra playlist in the video description as well. Anyway, yes, so I got into all of this whole, like, mess. I jumped around from one thing to another, and I got into, like, I've seen a lot of stuff, a lot of patterns and all this, and this is this very disorganized introduction, as you can tell already from the beginning. But I still feel like it was important to mention how I got into it, and yeah, basically, I have broken it down into a few things, okay? First of all, the main archetypes, let me put it like this, the main archetypes that I have noticed about Lilith are the sex symbol or the siren archetype. And this is the aspect of Lilith when a person is Lilith-dominated, and I'm going to show this in the video further down the line, what aspects, what actual configurations tend to make a person very Lilith in nature and tends to, you know, make people project their fantasies on them. But yes, the sex symbol aspect, the siren aspect that makes other people, particularly the opposite sex, but not only, of course, because there are people who are not straight, makes people project their dark fantasies, their erotic fantasies in particular, but not only, could be erotic, could be romantic. But yeah, it tends to project their unmet needs and also the dark sides of their psyches onto these individuals that are very Lilith-dominant. Then there is an aspect of being kind of like how should I put it? You know, the demonized one, you know, the ostracized one, the weirdo in society. The bad guy, quote unquote, the scapegoat even, right? Which kind of, you know, a lot of these archetypes, and in fact, all of them, they're kind of intertwined, you know. There's the demon archetype, the demonized scapegoat archetype goes together with the wild, untamed, unconventional individual, because Lilith carries a theme of, you know, freedom, desiring unbridled freedom, not wanting to be shackled, extremely independent. It's a very unique sort of energy, can I just say that? Because I kept trying, especially, and I've mentioned this multiple times on my channel, like I actually started out learning tropical astrology first. So I was familiar with Lilith before, but for a long time, you know, it kind of, you know, moved to the background of my psyche. I didn't really give it too much thought for years and years as I got more into Vedic. And then it started to resurface, you know, and I started to have this new perspective over it coming from the background of now knowing Vedic as well, you know. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, had to interrupt a bit and now I forgot. Yeah, I was gonna say... I was gonna say that Lilith is its own unique energy, you know, again, like I said, having now gone through pretty much everything on the spectrum of astrology, and when it comes to tropical, like I said, I've been into tropical for like 10 years, from the time that I was like 11 years old. The first time I got on the internet, the first thing I looked for was astrology, alright, so, I know almost everything about tropical. I know about progressions, about duads. I knew about divisional charts, even though I didn't know that they were coming from Vedic astrology, midpoints, I don't know, you name it, decanates. I've been through all of it. Sabian symbols. I don't think there's anything that a tropical astrologer could talk about that I would not have heard about before. And back when I was into it, I knew about Lilith. I was into it and, was very interested and curious and all this. And, I thought it was fascinating, especially from that feminist perspective and whatnot. And since I've gotten into Vedic, now that I know nakshatras and everything, the 27 nakshatras that basically overlap with the zodiac, that come from like a much richer place in terms of archetypes and in terms of deities and, all the specific characteristics that each of them have, I have to say, even though there are bits and pieces of like other archetypes that kind of are similar to Lilith, like the Pluto energy, I would say is similar, but it's not quite the same. I would say Purva Bhadrapada to some extent, also Ashlesha, because there's this theme of like dark sexiness about Lilith, but it's not quite the same thing, even though there might be an overlap with certain things. Lilith is its own independent energy, really. And the most interesting part is, of course, that it's not even actually a physical point. It is a hypothetical point, just like Rahu and Ketu, which are the north and the south node of the moon, respectively. It's actually called the lunar apogee, and it represents the spot where the moon is the farthest away from the earth. And I'm actually going to get into, well, I already have. I'm off my meds right now, all right? I should have taken more Concerta. I've started taking it for like more than half a year, and it got better, but now I'm like off of it, and I'm in my usual creative, everywhere, everything all at once sort of brain mode where I have like 1,000 streams of consciousness in my head, and I'm trying to make sense of everything. But anyway, I'm gonna finish with everything. I have notes and everything. I'm going to cover all the points that I need to, mention in this video, hopefully. So anyway, getting back to what Lilith stands for, that was what I was getting into. Not just what I think it stands for, but again, yes, this is mostly based on my empirical observation, but it's also based on the theories that I have, read from other astrologers. Now, some theories that I have come across, this goes back to my days in tropical astrology, say that Lilith represents a part of your subconscious that is kind of like a blind spot, parts of yourself that you have disowned. Which, to some extent, I guess that makes sense. But I think that's more like from an external perspective. Now, I will tell you what I have noticed, which is that Lilith, I think, is not necessarily parts of you that you have disowned. It simply is an energy that you possess that maybe you are not even fully aware of, which is kind of different than saying that you are in denial of something. It's more like you're kind of unconscious of them, but other people perceive this energy. And it's usually in a very kind of untamed, very instinctive energy, right? That comes across, well, first of all, everyone has a Lilith, right? But for some people, it is more strongly connected to their personality. It is more strongly connected to sometimes their physical body, their vitality. And I'm going to get more into the different types of aspects that I have found with respect to this. Like, for instance, I have discovered that there is a significant difference between people who have Lilith connected to masculine energies in their horoscopes, like the Lord of the first house, the Mars energy, to some extent also the Sun and Jupiter versus people who have Lilith connected to the feminine sides of their horoscope, you know, the moon energy, the second house, which is more receptive, which is also the face, and the Venus energy, right? And usually, again, I'm going to get more in detail as I go along, but with women, for instance, who are seen as very sexually attractive, usually you will see that either they have a balance between masculine and feminine, or they actually have a predominance of Lilith on the feminine sides of their personality, and particularly their physical appearance. But again, I'm going to get more into details as I go along with this. So yes, I think Lilith represents an area in general, all right, in the horoscope that shows where we want total freedom, right? We want to disobey the rules. And here, again, you can sort of draw a parallel between Lilith and Purva Bhadrapada, for instance, which is kind of has a similar theme of black magic, and because Purva Bhadrapada is ruled by a deity called Aja Ekapad, which is seen as like a deity connected to black magic. And I've also mentioned this in other videos, now that I'm on this trajectory, that I think we are in the age of Purva Bhadrapada. I mean, we are in the age of Aquarius, but the last stage of Aquarius is Purva Bhadrapada. So I really think that we are kind of going through that right now because of everything that you see happening in the world, the level of chaos, the level of also, in no small matter is also this focus on demons and supernatural in films, in literature, in the media. Also, all of the dark sides of humanity are being flushed out and out there for everyone to see. This focus on serial killers and whatnot. Whatever. I have talked about Purva Bhadrapada and how it is a nakshatra of extremes, and it's also a very fierce nakshatra, connected to a lot of savagery. And also, there's like the struggle with this nakshatra is that basically the archetype desires basically unbridled, uncontrolled, complete unrestrained freedom, but often doesn't take into account the consequences of their actions. So they want complete freedom, almost like a deity, where they don't have to think about anything bad that comes from them exerting their free will. Whatever. Again, see, I'm digressing now into Purva Bhadrapada, but the bottom line is, there are some parallels to be drawn between that and Lilith to some extent, and I think this is also, I'm going to say this now before I forget it, that I think one of the reasons why in today's world Lilith is so prominent in, for instance, the horoscopes of people who become very popular and even become sex symbols, I think it's precisely because of this Purva Bhadrapada undercurrent where, if you look around, it's like, especially with women, they've become, it's almost become like normalized for women to be overly sexualized, and to be, walk around half naked even. And actually, just out of curiosity, I have looked at the horoscope of, what is her name? Oh my god. Sydney Sweeney, who became, like, not too long ago, wasn't she in that, not too long ago actually became pretty controversial. I mean, the whole internet was full of pictures of herself at an award show, basically with her boobs out, like wearing some thin, sheer gown that showed her boobs. And guess what? She has 2 Arudha Lagnas, both of which have a Lilith in them. And I should have mentioned this, and I'm going to mention this right now, right after I finish this whole idea about the sexualization thing. And I think one of the reasons why you see this Lilith thing of, like, dark themes, it's almost like in today's world, it's become vanilla, for a woman to be beautiful with her clothes on. And again, this is talking about women, but to some extent it's also extending to men. With men, it's maybe not so much about, showing skin or something, but it is about men who are dark and edgy and, I don't know, creepy, whatever. Like, these kinds of men are now becoming more popular. This is becoming a more attractive archetype than maybe ever before. Even though technically, yes, women always kind of sort of liked bad boys. But if you would have looked at, I don't know, movies at the beginning of cinema maybe versus today's world, you see that it's become more and more extreme in terms of behaviors that are seen as attractive in one gender or another. It's like, movies are more violent, protagonists, of course, subsequently are more violent, etc., so on and so forth. Things like, I don't know, being a serial killer now is potentially attractive, which is something that would have never been, I don't know, acceptable like 100 years ago, for instance. Or at least it wouldn't have been acceptable to say this sort of thing in public. And yeah, I mean, Lilith creates this kind of siren. That's the best way that I can describe it. Actually, if you've heard of this guy, I think his name is Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power. What the hell was it called? I haven't read the book. I just saw an interview with him. But he was talking about, I think I saw the interview he did with Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson's daughter. I saw snippets of it because, again, I have ADHD. I can't watch the whole thing. Seriously though, but I do remember very vividly him talking about, no, it wasn't about power. Yeah, it was, he had this other book about seduction, something about the laws of seduction, and how he broke it down into different types of archetypes that people use, like portray certain archetypes to be as seductive as possible, depending on what their personalities and abilities are and physical appearances and all that stuff. And he actually said the siren in for women is the most attractive archetype. And I remember he said for a man the equivalent would be the rake. Well, I'm gonna take that a little bit and tweak it and say that actually I would say for women the most attractive male archetype is also a kind of siren. It's just that it's different than what men find attractive. But the bottom line is that the siren in and of itself, again, if you think about the legend, it kind of holds that Lilith archetype, of danger mixed with a dream that, you're going to get your needs met, that you're going to be happy. But really it's a fantasy, and the sirens in the legends basically were monsters that portrayed themselves as attractive, as naked women in the eyes of desperate sailors who hadn't seen a naked woman in months, and who would jump to their deaths, and basically the sirens would eat them. So the siren archetype is actually very much connected to Lilith. Also, when you take it back to the original legend, the original folklore connected to Lilith as a demoness. Because in Jewish folklore, so Lilith was supposedly was the first wife of Adam, who, as in Adam and Eve from the Bible. So supposedly, according to folklore and even some segments of the Talmud, I heard, which is like the Jewish oral Bible that Christians and the rest of the world don't get to hear about, there is this story about how Lilith is like, was supposed to be the first wife of Adam and was created from the same stuff, meaning from dirt, just like Adam. And according to some interpretations, she didn't want to be the submissive one during sex. According to other interpretations, she just would not submit to Adam at all in any form, as in just wanted to do whatever she wanted. And so she basically willingly left the Garden of Eden. I don't know if she willingly or was kicked out. I don't remember. But yeah, I think it was kind of more like she left the Garden of Eden and basically copulated with demons. And one of the demons that she copulated with was the father of mermaids or something, or like she birthed mermaids, like mermaids, and according to legends were her children. Whatever. There are all these like weird, this whole thing has been perpetuated probably over centuries, where there were some myths about how she eats babies, and how men have to guard themselves because she, I don't know, comes over at night and like whatever, does things to them. It's hilarious. But when you listen to all this stuff, it's like, it sounds like the typical sort of male fear of, of women. Like, it just sounds like the demonization of Lilith basically sounds like, the same thing that happened during the Inquisition with witches. Like, any woman who did not want to submit to a man was seen as somehow evil and would eat babies and all this shit. Anyway, but this is the legend, all right? This is the archetype, if you will, that has been perpetuated and has been, built up over centuries around this character of Lilith. And again, I realize that technically, logically, it makes no sense. I am well aware of that, because you would be thinking, okay, so there's this legend, how does it connect to the moon? Have no fucking clue. Okay, I just look at the patterns. I'm just a humble, observer of life. I have no idea how any of this really, okay, I have some ideas, but with this one in particular, I'm not really sure. I have to be honest, not sure how it connects, how the archetype connects, because it's really a mixture of things. And I mean, the best thing that I could come up with is, because it's connected to the moon, maybe it's like some kind of, dark side of the moon, because again, the moon rules the moon rules the mind, so if you were, maybe since Lilith is the furthest point away from the earth, I don't know, it's like the dark side of the moon, it's some blind spot that people kind of make sense that it would rule, a part that we are just not conscious of, and in everyone really. And it's interesting how with Lilith, again, in particular, people who have prominent Liliths, if it's in the ascendant, if it's conjunct a lot of planets, particularly the moon, I would say, they become these kind of Lilith archetypes that people project things on that they don't even really possess a lot of the times. And again, this whole thing, again, I could just do an entire psychological segment where I talk about how projection works, because I'm constantly hovering back and forth, not just with respect to Lilith, but with astrology in general. I'm kind of constantly thinking, I mean, how much of these aspects are truly just coming as an intrinsic characterization, for instance, if a person has a moon conjunct Mars, for instance, right, how much of their aggressiveness and drive comes from within, and how much of that comes from the way that other people have reacted to them when they were growing up, or the mothers that they had, whatever. This is an entire philosophical debate that I'm not going to get into. So just for practical considerations, I'm just going to tell you how it plays out. Okay, let's not look at the Genesis part and how this all came to be and how it connects to Lilith from the Bible and all. It's not from the Bible, actually. It's just from folklore. It's like Jewish folklore. There is a Lilith, actually, a reference to a Lilith spelled, I think, Lilit, in some part of the Bible. Don't remember which one. As far as I could see, there is no clear, proof that the Lilith that is referenced in the Bible actually refers to the Lilith from Jewish folklore that, molests men during the night and eats babies. But that Lilith also actually is a demoness that was warned that someone warned someone in the Bible about, because she might destroy an entire city or something like that. And also it is said that Lilith, spelled the way it was in the Bible, meant creature of the night, or some kind of owl, or some kind of night bird. So there, by the way, this is brilliant, because you're going to see as I go along, and eventually, by the 5th hour after I finish this video, I finish this recording, you're going to see with the examples that I found that actually, especially with men who have prominent Lilith, famous actors, for instance, they end up playing sexy vampires, which is unsurprising. Again, it goes hand in hand with Jordan Peterson, what he said about how women fantasize about vampires and beasts and all this stuff. And because women have some kind of fantasy about, taming the beast or something, some crap like that, honestly. Again, I don't think he's entirely wrong, maybe, but I also think he's overly generalizing, and he's definitely not entirely right about that. Also, let's not forget that a lot of these vampires that are shown in Hollywood films and now Netflix are, they're not beasts, okay? They're, pretty hot, so... Or was it Netflix? I don't remember who made the Dracula film. Anyway, I haven't even watched that one, to be honest. I tried watching it. Again, I'm digressing, but I tried watching the latest Dracula because I saw all this, commotion about it, and I didn't really like it. I mean, I just watched like 10 minutes and I was like, ugh. Anyway, but since I am talking about Dracula already, before I forget, I am going to get to this at some point. Gary Oldman, who played Dracula in the, I think, 1992 film, I was amazed and yet not totally amazed to see how strong Lilith is in his horoscope. And, I mean, I have to say, you normally wouldn't think of Gary Oldman as a male sex symbol, but when it comes to that particular role where he played Dracula, a lot of women are, even nowadays when you see like shorts of that film coming up, loads of women in the comments are like, damn. Like he was hot in that film. I don't know about other films, but that one, he looked nice. Paraphrasing what women said in the comments, all right? Not trying to say that I personally had the hots for him, although he wasn't bad looking, I have to admit. Also, a bunch of other, speaking of Dracula, I haven't looked at Winona Ryder's horoscope actually, but I wouldn't be surprised to see strong Lilith in there as well. Although maybe not as much. But the other actors, like, I can tell you Keanu Reeves, who was also in that film, and Monica Bellucci, who I think had her first minor role there, also have prominent Lilith placements in their horoscope, so I don't think that's a coincidence. And it's a thing. I also looked at, Interview with the Vampire, where Brad Pitt in particular, I mean, hello, Brad Pitt was like the sex symbol of, I think, the 90s and the 2000s, and he's still seen as, well, maybe not like the hottest thing out there because, he is getting older now, but I mean, he's still kind of remembered as one of the best looking men in Hollywood history, and he has Lilith rising. Unsurprising, yes. Lilith rising, unsurprising. I rhymed it there. And yeah, he played a vampire in Interview with the Vampire. And that was one of the roles that kind of, I think around that time, that was around the time when he actually started getting more and more traction. And it was probably one of the roles that helped him get noticed back in the 90s. And Tom Cruise doesn't have as prominent of a Lilith placement, but also has some significant Lilith placements, and he was also seen to be a male sex symbol back in the 80s and the 90s. But anyway, I digress. Oh, there's another one. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the men stuff later at some point, but since I keep remembering stuff, David Boreanaz, who played Angel on Buffy, okay, another hot vampire who also has pretty prominent Lilith placements. And a bunch of actors from Buffy, again, I did their horoscopes, also had prominent Lilith placements, including Sarah Michelle Gellar. So back to the general Lilith themes that I have noticed. Again, getting back to basics. So, like I said, it is similar to Pluto in the sense that I have seen Lilith be connected to control issues, but it's in a different way, if you will, because Pluto is coming more from fear, like losing the fear of losing control, fear of the unknown. With Lilith is kind of like again, it's kind of like a babe in the woods, and Lilith control actually comes from the outside, so people with, for instance, prominent Pluto, they may not necessarily, attract other people's projections on them. It's not necessarily the case that a person with, let's say, Pluto conjunct Moon or Pluto conjunct Mars or any kind of strong Pluto aspects in the horoscope, that this person is not going to be aware of their Pluto energy. In fact, quite the contrary. Many people who have strong Pluto aspects tend to be very much aware of these energies. They tend to actually be manipulative, but let me not get into that. I actually did videos on Pluto as well on my channel, so I'm going to try to link those as well if I find them. If not, you can just search for them. And Lilith, on the other hand, is kind of like, starts out in life being totally blind, oblivious to the energy that it carries. And other people notice it. Other people notice the fact that, oh, this person has an intense aura, other people will pick up this magnetism about them. Sometimes this magnetism can be And again, going back to that question of, is it really something that is there, or is it just people projecting their shit on other people? That is the question. Again, the bottom line is, no matter how you look at it, by the time that a person with strong Lilith reaches adulthood, they will embody the Lilith energies, even if they start out being unaware of having these energies. And again, it's not really clear if whether it's because they have the energy intrinsically, or it's because other people just lay out their shit on them, and in return the native has to develop coping mechanisms, right? It's kind of like not a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's like a community fulfilling prophecy. You know, it's like if everyone around you tells you that you are dark and brooding, then by the time you're 20 you kind of learn to work with it, right? Because it becomes too difficult to keep fighting other people's perceptions of you, and instead you just kind of go along with it. Which actually leads me to one of the major themes that you see, especially with women with prominent Lilith, which I think personally is quite disturbing. But a lot of them I have noticed, especially with these specific configurations that I'm going to be naming at some point down the line. Like I said, by the time I get to the third hour in this recording, I probably will have named them. Yeah. Especially women with prominent Lilith, they tend to be sexualized very early on in life. And in fact, again, naming examples off the top of my head, because I have looked at like over 70 charts just in the past few days, probably close to 100 by now, actually. I don't know if I'm going to go through all of them. I've also looked at some horoscopes that I have found, which I think are very important for this topic, of people who do not have prominent Lilith placements, so that you can see the comparison, including some sex symbols or people who, you know, were known as very attractive and very successful and in the public eye. But yes, going back to this, like, I think these women who have prominent placements, right, out of all of them that I've looked, I've seen quite a few who have been sexualized very young. And one of them, that's where I was getting at, is the actress Dominique Swain, who played Lolita back in the 90s. I think it came out, in 1997 or something, a movie with Jeremy Irons as the perverted adopted father or whatever, stepfather or whatever he was. And Dominique Swain, who played Lolita, had Lilith conjunct Mars, and I think maybe some other Lilith stuff going on. So pretty prominent Lilith energy. And I seen this as a trend. I saw Shirley Temple having significant Lilith energies. And again, this is really disturbing. And this is what I was talking about in the beginning, that I came across this really disturbing shit with, you know, people getting sexualized very young. And even most disturbingly, I can think about a few examples in real life that I have known throughout my life of, you know, friends and acquaintances, girls who from the time they were 13 or something, they were the target of unwanted attention from older men, and sometimes, you know, exposed to things that they shouldn't have been exposed to, and all kinds of crap. And yeah, and I was saying that I think my impression, and including, you know, so many of these famous sex symbols, for instance, Rita Hayworth was said to have had an incestuous relationship with her father that was very abusive from the beginning. She became a sex symbol. Marilyn Monroe grew up in a very unstable environment, you know, was moved around from foster home to foster home, was a victim of sexual abuse as a child, later became a sex symbol. And I think, another one, Pamela Anderson, who also, according to her own words, was a victim of SA, basically, when she was a teenager, later became kind of a sex symbol, right? And on and on, you know, you kind of see this theme where these women kind of turn, like, they start out, you know, being the victims of their own sexuality, or kind of like victims because of sexuality, and then learn to weaponize it later and kind of make it work to their advantage. Personally, I would not think of this as empowerment, although I know that feminism kind of leads towards this. I think of this as more like a coping mechanism, and I don't think it's healthy. But whatever, this is my personal opinion. However, there is a trend going on, and you see that a lot of these women who became sex symbols, like I said, and who were hypersexualized throughout their lives tend to have very prominent Lilith placements. I was actually, just to give an example, so again, I'm going to be jumping around from one thing to another, so I'm giving up, okay, I'm just giving my mind full reign. I'm sorry, I apologize, please bear with me, as usual. But I have to, like, I have to be in the flow, you know what I mean? And anyway, one example that I was thinking about right off the top of my head is Monica Bellucci. I remember actually reading an article about her ages ago, about her actual life, and her life was actually very similar to the character she played in Malena, where she played, by the way, if you've seen that film, I mean, I know it has been very popular, so I assume a lot of people know about it, but it was really messed up and really disturbing, and the whole story of Malena is basically about this woman who's kind of like the victim of her beauty in a way, because the women hate her because of that, and men kind of sexualize her, and she ends up being alone, and is kind of like, basically in a way becomes a prostitute forced by circumstances, because her husband goes to war and then he's declared dead or something, or missing in action, and or he just doesn't show up, whatever, and she has to support herself on her own. And yeah, that's the only way she ends up having to prostitute herself. And the whole movie, spoiler alert, kind of ends with her being the victim of violence, because other women are, pissed off at her because all the husbands are like staring at her and, obsessed with her and all that stuff. And actually by the very end of the movie, it ends with her kind of like, her husband comes back and she goes back into the city and people pretend like nothing happened. It's really fucked up. But her life was actually not, aside from the violence and horrible stuff, she was actually the victim of bullying. I remember in the article it said that her father was Iranian, and I had no idea that she was, I thought she was like purely Italian, just because, I mean, I guess, don't know, I had never read about her origin. I was pretty surprised about that. But apparently because her father was Iranian and she grew up in a small town, she was the victim of bullying because of that, and then she was bullied because of her appearance later as she got older, because she also became attractive. And, she also had all kinds of, like, weird instances with men. Like, her first boyfriend turned out to be abusive, which, again, I have to say is kind of a theme with these women, because, they are very tempting and also make men kind of go crazy because of this obsessive, this kind of energy that Lilith pulls out of, projection, and kind of, like, falling for these people as if they are sirens, as if they are the embodiment of, your fantasies and all this, and people become obsessed with them. And especially with women, right, it's particularly bad because women have to worry about their safety more. However, it can happen to men, and I'm going to get into that again as I go down the line. And I actually thought it was really fascinating that she played this character, which in a way is kind of Lilith, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this theme of Lilith, which is ostracization, feeling like you are the scapegoat. Either you're the scapegoat or that you're ostracized, like somehow you are not accepted in the community. And the messed up thing, I was going to say, the F word, the messed up thing about it is that this is mostly coming from other people's projections. So it's not because of the fault of the native. Now, again, I keep going back into that original idea of, like, is it actually something that's coming from within the native, or is it, something that people project on them? However, these people, I would say there is something there, because, again, Lilith is a vibe, all right? And I'm very good at picking up nuances by now, because I have been obsessed with astrology for over 20 years. And I will say that, and again, I'm going to get into specific aspects. There are very distinct vibes between, for instance, someone who has moon aspected by Lilith and someone who has ascendant aspected by Lilith, and also just someone who has prominent Lilith in general. And you're going to see this when I get to the concrete examples. And there's this vibe about them of something that is usually when it's on the ascendant in particular, like in Monica Bellucci's case, she has Lilith in the ascendant, so it's very much aspecting the physical body. And again, I've actually identified 2 different categories with respect to this. One of them that I would call Lilith on the masculine sort of aura, or masculine Lilith aura, and the other one that I would call feminine Lilith aura. And I would say that Monica Bellucci falls into the masculine Lilith aura. Now, I know normally when you look at her, you would not think of her as masculine in any way. But what I'm actually saying is that when Lilith is aspecting these very physical parts, you know, of the body, like the ascendant, which is, again, according to astrology, is the physical body, right? It's your whole body, right? It also and specifically focuses on the head, but it's actually the full body, the physical body, the biorhythm, your overall vibe, your energy, the shape of your body and all that. That is the ascendant. So when Lilith is in the ascendant, it creates this intense presence and this animal magnetism that, you know, makes people kind of stare at these people. And you actually will see with the examples that a lot of the times when Lilith is connected to either the ascendant, as far as I've seen, or the Lord of the ascendant, or Mars, because again, Mars is the natural Lord of the first house because it's connected to Aries, the first sign. And Mars, again, is the physical body, right? So it's another part that shows the physical body and the head in more, you know, in more detail, right, in particular. But it's the physical body, it's the muscle, right? It's the vibe that a person has, it's their mannerism, it's how they move, is their expression. So when Lilith touches these places, I would call this a masculine Lilith, right? It tends to make these people particularly prone to objectification, especially women, because they have this kind of aura of like threatening sexuality almost, you know, where people just see them as wild and untamed. And in particular, when it comes to men, I think it really brings out this kind of urge to control these women. Similarly to what I have described in that video that I did a while ago, that I think I pinned on my channel, actually, on my front page of the channel, with women who attract narcissists. And I would add Lilith to that, actually, if I were to make a continuation to that theme of what kind of, you know, configurations in a woman's horoscope will show that she tends to attract narcissists. I would say Lilith is a strong one, because it gives this very strong aura, this very strong presence that, you know, makes men in a way desire them, but also feel threatened and feel kind of like sometimes even emasculated sometimes. And in a weird way, kind of makes men question their sexuality, like in the sense of, not their sexuality, sorry, their virility. I think that's the key word. As in, you know, these women come across as like the kind of women that look like prizes, like sirens, and it makes men want to think like, ooh, could I own that? You know, could I dominate that? Am I man enough to control that sort of thing? It's really messed up. But again, if you look at the examples, if you look at women maybe that you know that have this vibe, you will see what I'm talking about. And I think in Monica Bellucci's case, she actually is particularly masculine Lilith aura. And again, I'm going to get more into detail about this later down the line with this topic, about how to see the differences between masculine Lilith and feminine Lilith, and why I think that this distinction is worth having. But I think with the masculine in particular, you see these cases where their bodies are objectified, like their bodies become a source of fascination, you know. And in particular with these placements, women tend to become hyperly objectified and sexualized, because whereas when Lilith is also aspecting the feminine, like the face, the moon and stuff, it's easier, even when these women are also seductive, attractive, tend to be projected upon, whatever, it kind of softens the Lilith energy, right? So it makes the Lilith energy less threatening to a masculine energy, right? Whereas when Lilith is in the ascendant, it has this very, like I said, this wild, untamed, all over the place, like, you know, think about the kind of demoness sort of devouring energy, either devouring or just something that is untamed and uncontrollable. Basically, what Jordan Peterson would call crazy women that cannot be controlled. Have y'all seen that part where he talked about there's no way for men to control crazy women? I think Jordan Peterson, I should look at his horoscope, because like I wonder what Lilith is doing in his horoscope. Like he has some weird stuff going on. There's some weird stuff going on over there. Like he definitely He definitely would not like a woman with prominent Lilith, I guess. Actually, speaking of this topic, since I am on this, and since I'm also talking about Monica Bellucci, I was thinking about this because she also played Mary Magdalene, you know? She played Mary Magdalene in that film, which has become very controversial, that was directed by Mel Gibson, about the Passion of the Christ, right? And I was actually going to talk about this, how Lilith in this Madonna whore dichotomy falls on the whore spectrum, of course. So for those of you who don't know, who maybe don't come from the Christian perspective, the Madonna whore stuff is basically Mary Magdalene versus the Virgin Mary. And according to, and again, I'm going to open a parenthesis right now because I have said this a long time ago. I don't know how many of you remember, maybe if you've listened to that video, that I wanted to do a video about Abrahamic religions and their views on women, but eventually, like, I kind of figured out, I realized that there would be no diplomatic way to say the stuff that I want to say, and yeah, it would probably ruffle a lot of feathers, but I don't know, who knows, I might still talk about it, so let me know in the comments if you're curious. But one of the things that I was going to say actually in that video was particularly about this Madonna whore complex, which happens to be in psychology, right? It's something that is now connected to narcissistic men on the dark triad, you know, who are narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths. These are the types of men who tend to divide women into these two main archetypes, the virgin or the whore. Basically, it's the virgin / mother or whore, which are exactly the archetypes that you see in the Bible, you know? And I would argue, yes, I come from a Christian perspective, so I'm mainly referencing the Christian Bible, but I would argue you're not going to find any example in either of the three Abrahamic religions of a female archetype that does not subscribe to either one of these, either the virgin, the mother, or the whore. There maybe there's a tiny little subsection of women who are kind of what I would call the useful idiots, which are women who maybe just help to perpetuate the religion. But you're not going to see any other archetypes of women that are praised in Abrahamic religions, right? They're basically, the views on women in Abrahamic perspectives are very limited. There, I have just given you the main idea of what I wanted to say in that video, so I think it's pointless to talk about it now. But yeah, back to the Lilith thing. Basically, the Lilith is the Mary Magdalene / whore archetype, right? The woman who, and again, Mary Magdalene in Christianity was seen as kind of like, was the one that was definitely the most controversial because she had a history of being a prostitute. And eventually, whatever, came across Jesus. And then there's, of course, the controversial theory that she was actually dating Jesus and all this stuff, whatever. That was perpetuated by the Da Vinci Code, whatever. But the bottom line is the Mary Magdalene archetype is that woman who was just not traditional, like was not the wife archetype, whatever. And again, you actually see this as a theme that actresses, for instance, who have prominent Lilith tend to play these kinds of like temptress, or women with a dark past, or the Scarlet Letter stuff, you know. A Scarlet Letter would also be kind of a Lilith, any kind of, you know, any kind of character, I think, female character that, you know, is just non-conventional, particularly when it comes to the topic of how she expresses her sexuality, would probably be a Lilith archetype or a Mary Magdalene archetype. And also this leads me to that very sad realization that unfortunately a lot of these women, also as real women, not just women who have prominent Lilith in their horoscopes, but women throughout history who have ended up in these positions, like Mary Magdalene, I'm sure, did not end up in those positions because, you know, they actually wanted that. It was probably because they were sexualized as children and they were led to believe that this was the only way that they could contribute to the world, and later on were met by men who couldn't wait to exploit their traumas by encouraging them to become hookers, for instance, or nowadays it's women who are strippers or doing porn or doing OF or whatever. But yeah, and these kinds of women are demonized basically, and it's kind of like they're demonized, but they're like purposefully shoved into being sexualized simply because they refuse to submit to the male order basically in society. So like for most of human history, and even in today's world, really not much has changed. You see, like, anytime a woman wants to do something that does not suit men's selfish needs of women just staying at home and taking care of kids, they're labeled as whores or there's something wrong with them. Let's not forget that from the beginning of feminism, and even nowadays, you see men talking about how women who focus on having a career, sometimes you will, even in today's world, you hear men kind of associating that to having an easy, promiscuous sexual behavior, when in reality, a lot of these women don't even give a shit about sex to begin with. I mean, if they did, they would have probably just gotten married. It would have been the easiest way to make money. But according to the narrow-minded male view of women, you know, through which they have to figure out a way to profit from women's sexuality, they just throw any woman who doesn't want to be a submissive housewife in the category of whore or Mary Magdalene type, or Lilith, or whatever you want to call it, you know, insert various, or witch, you know, or whatever. Insert various names that they have come up with labeling these kinds of women throughout history. Basically, women who are just non-conforming, or who are the wild, untamed, do whatever the hell they want to do sort of personalities. So back to the general characteristics of Lilith. So there's this aura of intense magnetism. And like I said, especially when Lilith is connected to the physical body, there's this, you know, physical magnetism. There's this strong presence where they're just impossible to ignore. And yeah, the thing about this is I've actually noticed even when they're not particularly attractive, like even when they're not conventionally attractive, there's just something about their bodies that makes other people kind of sexualize them or think sexual things about them or whatever. Like, yeah, this is the kind of vibe that I have noticed. And because of this, like I said, there's also the theme of getting unwanted attention, unwanted sexual attention. They often, because of this, I think, because of this sort of develop, or again, maybe they're born with it, maybe it's Maybelline, you know, maybe they are developing a sort of brooding, intense energy as a response to the way that they get treated by other people, get ostracized and whatnot. By the way, I have to mention, when it comes to the theme of ostracization or being scapegoated, it's not always because they're sexualized, right? It's not because they're attractive necessarily, but there will be something about them that just challenges the status quo, you know, like they have this vibe of not going with the program, not going in line with everyone else, not following the crowd, you know. And they can attract a lot of hatred because of that, because people feel threatened by their independence, by their sense of power. Yeah, so it could even be things like being subjected to bullying, you know, when they're growing up, or being subjected to sometimes even physical violence, sometimes even, you know, being attacked within their own homes by people around them because of their independent, unconventional nature. But again, like I said, a lot has to be seen from the perspective of what specific Lilith aspects this native has. But yeah, with the aspects that I have mentioned, these are the general outcomes. Like with the aspects that I have studied, I mean, and I have yet to name them, but bear with me, I'm going to get there at some point. But yes, they have a certain intensity, they have a certain aura about them. People tend to project all kinds of fantasies on them, either tend to project their fantasies, or they tend to project their rage, or it could be at the same time, you know, because desire. And actually, speaking of this, it was so hilarious. It's kind of ironic to me, because I remember as I was doing the research for this video, I actually remember reading a quote from Monica Bellucci in a magazine ages ago, back when I read magazines. And it said something along the lines of like, beauty can be a curse because when a beautiful woman walks into a room, every man wants to possess her, but also hates her because he cannot possess her, and also every woman hates her because she gets attention. And I remember thinking, you know, while I was doing the research for this video, that on the one hand, yes, you could kind of say that about beauty in general, but I think that is particularly true about the Lilith archetype, because to be honest, and again, you're going to see this more when I get to the non-Lilith examples that I have come across, there are women and have been women throughout history who are very conventionally attractive. I'm talking, perfect faces, perfect features, perfect bodies, symmetrical, natural, without surgery, and yet they do not elicit the level of intense, obsessive attention that the Lilith archetypes attract from men a lot of the times. And again, it's also sometimes going from women to men. And again, I'm going to get to some male examples that I've come across as well. But also, I think the reason why you will definitely see that I have found disproportionately way more Lilith women versus men, especially among famous actresses and sex symbols, singers and whatnot, because we still live in a male-dominated world, and again, Hollywood has been male-dominated for 100 years or something. Maybe nowadays it's become more feminist. Thank God, now we have even women get more eye candy, or at least we have gotten in the past few decades. Because before that, it was all male-dominated. It was like men just promoted the kind of women that they wanted to see, the kind of content they wanted to see, right? Which also nowadays you hear this being discussed, the male gaze and women who dress for the male gaze. Can I just say, Sydney Sweeney is definitely an example of a woman who dresses for the male gaze. Not throwing shade, I'm just telling it like it is. There are some women who go by the conventional path, even in today's world, right? And again, I'm gonna show you more examples of this as I go along. But yes, the scapegoat, the ostracization, back to Lilith themes, sticking to the program, can be targets of violence. Basically, that's the bottom line. They can be targets of various degrees of violence throughout their lives, whether it's psychological, emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, all forms of violence. And yeah, it is a thing with the Lilith archetypes. There's this undeniable, unmistakable energy of the siren, the forbidden fruit connected to them, like something, just as I have discussed actually in the video where I talked about Lilith and synastry, that it creates this intense, obsessive attraction where two people who normally don't even have anything in common, will bind together. They will be drawn to each other like a moth to the flame. And usually it's the planet person that is attracted to the Lilith. But I've actually seen this, in recent, in light of recent revelations. I don't know. It's like I've seen it both ways. Actually, speaking of Lilith aspects, one example that before I forget, so please remind me if I ever do a sequel to that video about Lilith and synastry, a recent example of a couple that has Lilith and synastry is Eminem and his ex-wife, who married twice apparently. And I looked at their horoscope, and she has her Mars conjunct his Lilith. It's interesting that he's the Lilith in this situation. I don't know if they also have a Lilith going from her Lilith to his horoscope. I don't remember. But yeah, he definitely has his Lilith. I say Lilith too many times. Conjunct her Mars, and I think some other planets as well. So it's interesting because again, an obsessive, back and forth relationship. I'm sure they had other stuff going on, and also her time of birth is not known, so I cannot know the full picture. But it's an interesting thing to look into at some point later down the line if I look for more examples of Lilith and synastry. Eminem and his ex, Kim something, I don't remember her full name. And as far as I have read, that was a mess. Now, who knows how much of that was genuine and how much of it was for publicity because, they're in the limelight. But I have read some disturbing stuff, like he did a concert where he talked about how he wanted to murder her or punched a doll that looked like her or some shit like that. I don't know, some weird, volatile stuff that I guess you would sort of expect from a rapper. Whatever. But yes, the natives who have prominent Lilith, they carry this aura within them, so it's like like I said, every individual person has a Lilith. So at any point in synastry, you might come across someone who has their Lilith conjunct one of your planets, and suddenly they will become a siren to you, yeah? But then there are also people who have this siren energy kind of emanating like a beacon, like a lighthouse, shedding light all around that people can see and kind of project their collective fantasies upon them, irrespective of whether they, these people have personal synastry Lilith relationships with this person, with the beacon person, you know what I mean? The lighthouse person. So, and also just to get into some examples, as a warm-up, I guess, some general examples, I'm definitely going to split this video because it's going to be way too long to talk about everything all at once. No, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I'm just going to talk about the examples that I have written down here and some other... Yeah, I'm going to see. Some examples. Natalie Portman, who has Lilith rising, all right, got her first major role playing a teenage prostitute in Leon the Professional, right? This is the theme that I was talking about sexualized early in life. And again, I'm not saying that Natalie Portman herself was sexualized, and here you actually see the human intervention part, because I think one of the reasons why Natalie Portman turned out relatively sane is probably because she had a very supportive family. Because if she had the same level of luck that Marilyn Monroe had, where she would have been a foster child, I don't think she would have turned out as healthy. Because again, just the way that she started being sexualized, being portrayed as a teenage prostitute, yeah, not cool. I never actually saw that film, or I don't know if I did. I don't think there was anything particularly explicit in it, but just the whole storyline. And also Natalie Portman, again, just like many of the examples that I have looked at, kind of has a history of picking controversial roles and potentially Lilith-themed roles. And also, again, I should have mentioned this maybe from the beginning, that one of the archetypes that I have seen is, there is this theme of the women who use sexuality to their advantage. Yes, that's one way that the Lilith-dominant women tend to develop. But then there's also another theme of women who become hyper-feminist. The hyper-feminist, tough, independent, no-nonsense type of women. For instance, the lead singer of the Dresden Dolls, Amanda Palmer, who was also a victim of SA according to her testimonials, and now is married to an asshole, Neil Gaiman, who has been accused of SAing assistance, but whatever, not getting into that. But but Amanda Palmer is an example. I looked at her horoscope just again, fleetingly, but I have seen Lilith conjunct some stuff. All right, so she has some strong Lilith energy there, and that's a feminist example. Another sort of feminist example, is Gal Gadot, who is also, although good looking, I think, and also maybe a little bit of the seductress, also had that very feminist role in Wonder Woman, and tends to, be pretty much a feminist sort of vibey person. I haven't actually looked at her horoscope more in depth. I'm gonna mention her again once I do. But I do remember definitely at least a major conjunction involving Lilith, Not as prominent as the other actresses that I've looked at, but there is something there. Another example, I don't know how many people know about this one, Mylene Farmer, I don't know how to pronounce it. She is I think, Canadian singer. She was popular in the 90s, or at least I knew about her. I don't know how popular she is. I don't know how popular she is, worldwide, but she used to dress like a man, and it was kind of back and forth, where she had videos where she was very sexualized, and then she had videos that were kind of creepy. I remember her song Comme J'ai Mal, and where she was turning into a butterfly. It was really creepy, the whole thing. But whatever, that's not necessarily a Lilith theme, although, this theme of like demonic imagery and, creepiness, again, where I would kind of draw a parallel between Lilith and Purva Bhadrapada, that's a thing. However, the main thing that I wanted to say about her was the fact that, she had videos where she was dressed like a man, and she, had this kind of very kind of tomboyish sort of vibe in her videos on stage, her stage persona. And she has very prominent Lilith masculine energy, like Lilith in the rising connected to masculine planets. So it's very kind of intense, very in your face sort of energy. To some extent, I've seen the same thing with Halsey, the singer, who ironically, actually, just before I started, like about an hour before I was finally about to get down to record this video, I just remembered, wait a second, didn't I hear a song called Lilith, like, in the past 2 years? And then I remembered that there was this song called Lilith that Halsey recorded with another singer called Suga. I don't know what his name, I can't pronounce his name. I did look his name up, but I don't remember. Kim something? Is it Kim? I don't remember. Anyway, I looked, I actually remembered that I had looked up his horoscope and her horoscope ages ago. And I remembered that he had Sun in Purva Bhadrapada, and I thought, figures. I mean, someone singing about demons with Sun in Purva Bhadrapada, that makes sense, because of everything that I said in that video where I talked about Purva Bhadrapada, by the way. And again, I will be linking the Nakshatra playlist in the video description so you could look through it. But I was even more surprised, and at the same time not surprised, to see that he also has prominent Lilith opposite his ascendant, if I'm not mistaken. But it was definitely aspecting his ascendant. Same thing with Halsey. And with Halsey, it was particularly telling because, I think personally that she is drop dead gorgeous. I mean, if you just look at her purely from a physical perspective, she is very good looking. And, has this really great body, which makes sense with the Lilith energy. Hello. Not just with Lilith, I mean, she also has Venus rising, which definitely helps. Venus in the ascendant, which means that she has inherited the best genes of her family. That's usually what happens with these people who have Venus in the ascendant. And they tend to be conventionally good looking. They tend to have, very nice features, proportionate bodies, etc. A lot of conventionally attractive features. But her overall vibe, her energy is very intense, and she has also spoken about being openly bisexual and everything. And I think that's really coming from, again, having a predominantly masculine Lilith vibe, where it's, heavily aspecting her physical body, her energy, her aura, her intensity, and not so much like any soft energy. There's no like moon happening, no Moon-Lilith thing going on to soften the blow. However, she actually does have Lilith aspecting Venus, because Venus is in her Lagna, so there's a lot of Lilith on the body, it's aspecting not just the Lagna itself or the ascendant, again, Lagna, ascendant, same thing, but it's also aspecting Venus, the Lord of the ascendant, because she has ascendant in Libra, and Venus is sitting in the ascendant, and Lilith is looking at it, So it's a heavy Lilith on the body sort of energy, and she's like this, again, very, I think, conventionally attractive, but I don't know how much of, like, again, just my 2 cents, have no idea, but just based on stuff that I've seen and heard and whatever, I don't know how much Halsey is perceived as a male fantasy. I would say she is definitely seen as attractive, but not so much a male fantasy, which actually leads me to this main dichotomy between the masculine and the feminine Lilith, which is that I've seen, particularly when it comes to these women that are seen as the pure sirens, quote unquote, as in male fantasy land, they either tend to have only or mostly a feminine energy, right, of Lilith, meaning Lilith is aspecting the second house, the lord of the second house, which is the face, or aspecting the moon, which again is the face, and also the feminine energy of a woman in general, but especially the face, and the face, basically. Face and the neck. Second house is face and neck again. And what I've seen is that the male fantasy types of women who are Lilith dominant
have this feminine Lilith energy mostly, not so much the masculine, meaning the Lilith on the ascendant. And what I've actually noticed is that these masculine Lilith types tend to be more of those unapologetically feminist, aggressive, in-your-face types of women, either like that, or if they don't go down that path of like being kind of owning the Lilith archetype of the, you know, untamed, wild, like I'm gonna do whatever I feel like sort of energy, which is usually what Lilith stands for. Either they embody that or they tend to become objectified, you know. And I think I was actually going to say this when I talked about Monica Bellucci, that I think the reason why Monica Bellucci to a large extent I think avoided being the target of hatred, particularly from male audiences, is because she is very calculated and very controlled in her expression. And this is actually, again, this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, but I think through, basically the bottom line is that to a large extent through her own behavior, through her own efforts, she has done her best to portray herself in a ladylike manner, and maybe because also she has other placements in her horoscope that kind of soften up her image a little bit, you know. And despite all that, you know, she still has been objectified in many ways in films and whatnot. But going back to the famous examples, as I was saying, especially with this Lolita sort of theme, which I find really disturbing. So there was Natalie Portman, and then Jodie Foster also, who played, again, got her break playing a prostitute in, I think, Taxi Driver, also has some pretty significant Lilith energy. You know, trine Mars again. I'm going to get to the list of aspects that you have to look for a little bit later, the concrete list of exactly what to look for. But this is the gist of it is when it comes to Lilith, I look at conjunctions, oppositions, trines, and I look at Mars. And this is for the masculine Lilith, right? Mars, ascendant, Lord. These are the most important things. If these are aspected by Lilith, by conjunction, opposition to a smaller degree, yes, the trine, I would call this like a masculine Lilith sort of energy, right? If it is aspecting the moon, the second house Lord, that is a feminine Lilith. Sometimes people have both, as you're going to see again with some examples. But yeah, Jodie Foster, as I was saying, some significant, has a Rudha Lagna in Pisces, opposite Lilith as well. So she has some pretty significant Lilith as well. And she got her break playing a teenage prostitute. And now Jodie Foster, I don't think she was particularly sexual. I mean, debatable, I guess. She also played, again, played very feminist roles. She's also a lesbian. I don't know how much that added to anything, but I think she also had this very kind of tough, no-nonsense sort of vibe throughout her entire life. And of course, she played, what was her name? Clarice something? Sterling? Maybe Sterling or Starling in Silence of the Lambs. So I think that was kind of more of a feminist sort of archetype that would fall in line with the Lilith. And yeah, just an example. Evan Rachel Wood, another example. And this is the part where, again, I'm going to mention Manson, not in a positive way. But I looked at her horoscope, and I do remember when I was looking into, like I said, that whole thing about Manson and the accusations against him. I remember just seeing an interview with Evan Rachel Wood where she talked about the accusations and what he put her through and all this stuff. And she mentioned that he had taken privately filmed scenes of her in intimate moments, as in basically borderline erotic stuff that he should have never made public, and that he took bits of that and put it into his video for, what the hell was it called? a song that he had where basically she plays this Lolita-esque sort of character. Oh my god, yes, Heart-Shaped Glasses. That's what it was called, the song. And she actually plays this kind of Lolita-esque character, and the lyrics are kind of gross, and something like, he calls her like little girl or something, some stuff like that. And I remember at the time when I came across that, you know, the video and the stuff that she said, I vaguely remembered that Evan Rachel Wood was in a film in the early 2000s called 13, where she actually played a troubled teenager who was starting to rebel in all kinds of crazy ways. She was being raised by a single mother, and she started hanging out with this other girl who was no good, and they started behaving, you know, in all shades of crazy, started being sexually promiscuous, and she was kind of, in a way, playing a very kind of troubled Lolita sort of character, because the character in the film was supposed to be 13. And what I thought about later, which really creeped me out, but I think that I am right based on the evidence, I really think that it seemed like Manson basically fetishized her character from that film when he took segments and whatever, filmed her and whatnot, and used that as footage for this song, Heart-Shaped Glasses, which is also based on the lyrics. I don't know if it was inspired by her, the song, I mean, I'm guessing maybe, but it was around the time that they were dating, and I just realized that basically they were dating shortly after this film. I mean, shortly as in a few years, because she was still very young after this film came out. It seemed more like he was fetishizing her, basically, but based on her role in this film. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong, okay? And anyway, Evan Rachel Wood, again, has a pattern. I don't know about a pattern, actually, but I can think about this 13 film that she was in, where she played this kind of troubled Lolita character. Then she also played this more interesting, more mature Lilith archetype in Westworld. I was very surprised, to be honest, when I found out that Westworld was not particularly successful, because I thought it was a really cool series. Personally, I love sci-fi, so... But it was also pretty dark, and her character, she's like the main character, basically. Her name is Dolores, I think. Dolores or Dolores, I don't remember. Something along those lines. And, okay, spoilers. I'm gonna add a spoiler alert. So if you still want to watch that series, because I think it's worth watching, I don't know, fast forward a couple of minutes. But she plays this character where she's a robot, basically, and doesn't know she's a robot. It's in this futuristic sort of scenario where humans have created this theme park called Westworld, where there are very realistic humanoid robots living in there, and one of them is this Dolores character. And it's not revealed from the beginning, but she is basically like she's like a major inspiration for the guy that runs the entire park, and the guy is a complete psychopath, actually, who goes to that park together with other guests. The park is basically like like, I don't know, not a circus, but some kind of messed up park where basically humans go to act out their craziest, darkest fantasies. I mean, in and of itself, it kind of sounds Lilith / Purva Bhadrapada, but whatever. And yeah, this guy goes there basically regularly just to assault her, basically, because I don't know if he hates her, or like she was someone that he was in love with. But I mean, he went to the park when he was young, fell in love with her, didn't know she was a robot, or some kind of weird stuff. I don't remember the full story. But the bottom line is, like, her character is this character that is very, very, I mean, basically only exists to be abused, and like very disempowered, and, you know, just lives through various traumas every day, and then goes through this repair shop where they take robots, basically, and has her memory wiped out just so she could be abused again the next, like, day, or whatever the next games are, or whatever the hell is. And by the end of the season, she becomes this, like, self-aware, you know, AI who masterminds taking over the entire park and all this stuff, and turns into this, like, I don't know, badass cowboy character that goes shooting people and stuff, whatever. It's very kind of Lilith theme in the sense of, again, there's kind of like this theme of a woman who gets essayed and ends up by the end of it kind of becoming very empowered and very aggressive and feminist, I guess you could say that. I was actually just thinking about this. Another theme like this is also similar in Game of Thrones with Daenerys Targaryen, and Emilia Clarke, the actress who played Daenerys, has Moon conjunct Lilith. And so she's a feminine Lilith type, which again kind of goes into hand in hand with what I was saying, that the feminine Lilith types tend to be the male fantasies types, because I mean Daenerys Targaryen, I mean the actress who played her, but especially in that role as Daenerys, was kind of a male fantasy. And also, I thought it was really disgusting, but I think most people who have seen Game of Thrones remember that the character had a scene right in the first season where she was horribly essayed by her, I think, husband, the guy who was supposed to be her husband, that she was sold into marriage to, I think. Whatever. And by the end of the season, it's like she ends up using her charms, her abilities that were also kind of supernatural in that show. And by the end of it, becomes this very powerful and actually also very destructive character. Basically, you know, finds friends, gathers an army, gets dragons, and all that stuff. Whatever. I thought the character is very interesting because I also plan on doing a video at some point about Ardra, and I'm definitely going to mention her there because, like I said, I also am convinced, I'm not 100% sure because Emilia Clarke's time of birth is not given, but I have looked at her horoscope and it's almost like 70% sure that she has Moon in Ardra. And based on her physical appearance, I think she definitely has Moon in Ardra. And again, I'm not going to talk too much about Ardra now, but yeah, I think that character is like an embodiment of an Ardra theme as well, and also has some Lilith elements to it. But I think the actress, yes, has Lilith conjunct Moon, so you can see that you know, kind of female seductiveness going on. And yeah, it's also this theme of the, like I said, the person who gets abused and kind of like sexually abused, which is a very sort of disgusting and gender specific form of abuse, which is in line with the Lilith theme, I think. I think this theme tends to show up pretty commonly in a lot of films, actually. Maybe more so in modern films and series than in previous ones, but as in the theme of the woman who, like I said in the beginning, you know, women who get molested or sexually abused and then later somehow learn to use their sexuality in their favor. To either to manipulate or, yeah, to kind of like slowly gain power and momentum in life and later resort to other means to continue to gain power and autonomy in life. Aside from this, yes, as I was saying, Evan Rachel Wood, so she has ascendant Saturn in Scorpio. Most importantly, has one of her Arudha Lagnas in Cancer, which puts Lilith in her Arudha Lagna because she has all three Liliths in Cancer. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it right now, and there are probably going to be a lot of confused people asking in the comment section because they're not going to find this part in the recording because it's right at 1 hour and 37 minutes in. I should have mentioned this from the beginning, but I kind of mentioned it sort of in the sense that I'm only going to look at the three calculations. So there's the mean Lilith, the osculating or true Lilith, and the interpolated Lilith. All of these Liliths are basically the same thing. They're slightly different calculations, but based on what I have seen through the hundreds of horoscopes that I have looked at throughout my life, and also the roughly 80 that I looked at for this video, they tend to stay in the same sign, or at most one of them will be in one or two of them will be in the neighboring sign. So if you'll have like osculating and interpolated in Virgo, maybe the mean is going to be in Libra. I have not looked at asteroid Lilith because that's slightly different. Other times I have also looked at asteroid Lilith just to be, I don't know, more inclusive. And when it comes to relationships, yes, I sometimes have looked at asteroid Lilith more. But when it comes to the mean, the osculating, or the true Lilith and the interpolated Lilith, you can't go wrong with these ones. So as long as I just decided to stick with these ones to simplify it, you know, to not make a difference, to not also take into account a physical body like an asteroid Lilith, right? Because that one is a little bit different. It's not as strongly connected to the same energy point as these are. But yeah, going back to Evan Rachel Wood, yeah, all three Liliths in Cancer, ascendant, and Saturn in Scorpio, which puts Lilith in trine to her ascendant. And like I said, one of her Aruta Lagnas are in Cancer, which puts Lilith in her Aruta Lagna. And the Aruta Lagna in Aquarius with Moon in Aruta Lagna, Sun, Venus, Mars opposite Aruta Lagna. The other Aruta Lagna is in Aquarius, yes, with Moon in Aruta Lagna. And also, yeah, as I have mentioned in the beginning, Manson happens to have his ascendant moon conjunct her Liliths. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier when I talked about him a little bit, and his tendency to go for Lilith-dominated relationships. And he also happens to have Venus trine Lilith, like I said, which I don't think is a coincidence, because well, first of all, for a man, as many of you know, especially if you've watched a lot of my videos, Venus is the wife archetype, right? And it also shows, to a large extent, also shows what a man wants in a relationship. So if Lilith is connected to Venus, it means that men might be drawn to these, you know, intense, obsessive, control, power control themed sort of relationships. Yeah. Then yet another example, just to show you how messed up Hollywood is, of an actress who played a child prostitute, and I think this is probably the most disturbing one that I have read about, was Brooke Shields. She played a child prostitute in Pretty Baby, and she has Lilith in Capricorn, trine Moon, Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Rahu, and Venus in Taurus. True Lilith is in Sagittarius, trine her Mars ascendant in Leo, and her Aruta Lagna in Scorpio. The reason I mentioned Aruta Lagna in Scorpio is because, again, I've done a video, like I said, for every sign as Aruta Lagna, but the one that I did on Scorpio in particular was focused on how Scorpio as Aruta Lagna is another point that tends to show people objectifying these natives, because they tend to be seen as dark and brooding and seductive. And I also mentioned how a lot of sex symbols tend to have Aruta Lagna in Scorpio. Yeah, but yeah, Brooke Shields also has some pretty significant Lilith energy going on, and it's aspecting both her feminine and her masculine sides, which means that both her physical presence, her body, would have been sexualized and seen as attractive, as well as her face. I've also, speaking of I was gonna say, there are three main types. Okay, I'm gonna go through it right now, okay? There are three main types, three main categories that I've seen based on the horoscopes that I've looked at with respect to degrees of intensity of Lilith influence. And the three main categories are heavy Lilith aspects. The second would be mild to medium Lilith aspects, or Lilith influence. And the third category would be no significant Lilith influence. Now, how did I divide these? The first category that I called heavy Lilith aspects include Lilith in the Aruta Lagna, or opposite the Aruta Lagna, Lilith in the ascendant or opposite the ascendant, Lilith conjunct or opposite the ascendant lord, Lilith in the second house or the 8th house from the ascendant. And this is because in the second or the 8th house from the ascendant, this influences the face, all right, and the facial expressions. Lilith conjunct or opposite the moon for the same reason, because opposite conjunct or opposite moon means it influences the face. Lilith conjunct or opposite the lord of the second house, which again is the face. And I mainly considered the conjunction and the opposition because these are the strongest aspects, all right? These are impossible to miss, basically. So this is why I named the people who have these kinds of aspects heavy Lilith aspects. Now, of course, even among these categories, there are degrees of heaviness, right? You could come across, just as I've mentioned with some examples already, some of them could have multiple of these, right? You could have Marilyn Monroe, for instance, had 2 Liliths in her ascendant, 1 Lilith in her second house, also had an aspect to her Mars, I'm pretty sure, don't remember exactly, but yeah, one of the Liliths, it's so hard to say it over and over again, is aspecting her Mars. Yeah, and so she had multiple stuff in addition to also having Venus in the Arudha Lagna. So no wonder she became a giant sex symbol, because she had all of these aspects that would make a woman highly attractive and lusted after, whatever. Yeah, so, and then the second category would be mild to medium Lilith influence, and the way that I have described this would be Lilith conjunct, opposite, or trine any other planet than the previously mentioned, as in any other planet other than the moon or the lord of the Lagna or the lord of the second house. Okay. Yeah, and you will see plenty of examples like this, right? A lot of, especially what I've seen with artists, a lot of them have, especially these ones that tend to be dark or known for dark roles or dark music, like Lana Del Rey, I've mentioned, Venus conjunct Lilith, right? They tend to have Lilith aspecting Venus or conjunct Venus. Yeah, so to some extent, I would call this mild Lilith influence, even if it's just, the only exception, and I'm going to get to the exceptions at the end, okay? The exception, but I'm going to tell you the exception, all right? The exception is conjunction to Saturn, to some extent also conjunction to Jupiter, and also to some extent conjunction to Ketu, because these are planets and points, Ketu is a point, that diminishes the energy that it touches, all right? Saturn constricts and restricts, and I actually separately looked into examples that have a strong Lilith but also have strong Saturn, and it's almost like the Saturn almost entirely cancels out the Lilith energy, almost, depending on what specific aspects are sitting there, you know, like how exactly is Saturn intertwining with the Lilith energy, right? But the reason it cancels, I think, is because of this very cold, restrictive vibe that Saturn has, right? So where you see a person who has prominent Lilith, but let's say they have Saturn conjunct Lilith. Let's say a person has like Lilith in the ascendant, but they also have Saturn there. I would say to a large extent they won't show the Lilith energy, or it will be very, very subtle, if at all, right? Because Saturn, again, is very cold, very restrictive, and it tends to keep that stuff locked down. You know, the person will be repressed almost, will have this kind of repressed vibe. Either it could be like that, or it could be in a darker way, and I've seen this happen as well. Because Saturn is about control, depending on what else is going on there, you could also actually see this in the opposite direction, where it actually attracts even more violent attention, right? Not so much sexual attention, but like abuse. Not as, again, I don't want to say like something really nasty and like that is going to make people paranoid, but stuff like that where, you know, people try to restrict them or constrict them, or they see them, see the native as very intense and very harsh, you know, and kind of intimidating, so they back off, you know. So it's not kind of, it kind of, you know, sheds this like ice cold energy on this Lilith energy, right? Where it kind of keeps people away to a large extent. Same thing to some extent with Jupiter, because Jupiter is the great benefic. And one example that I've seen like this was Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet actually has some pretty prominent Lilith energy in her horoscope. So it touches both her, the physical side, what I call the masculine, and also the feminine sides of her psyche. You know, the ascendant lord, the face, are aspected by Lilith. However, she also has heavy Jupiter and heavy Mars going on at the same time. You know, also kind of aspecting that Lilith energy. So it's really toning it down, because Jupiter is a moralistic, you know, it's kind of like, it's called the great benefic for a reason. This is why a lot of negative, intense configurations that a person can have in the horoscope is to a large extent canceled out by Jupiter, provided that it's relatively healthy and strong. I said the same thing when I did those videos where I talked about, you know, daddy issues and mommy issues. I actually still have yet to do videos about mommy issues, but I did a video where I talked about daddy issues. I mentioned there, at least in the comments, if not in the video, that if you have Jupiter aspecting the sun, even if the sun is very damaged, right, it tends to cancel out a lot of the negative expressions, and it may not even show any of the traditional daddy issues, right, if Jupiter is conjunct the sun or even looking at the sun by 5th or 9th aspect. Same thing with Lilith, as far as I've noticed. It's because I think it gives this very jovial, happy-go-lucky, and it's almost like, it's not like the person that has Jupiter and Lilith is not gonna also be attractive. It's more like Jupiter is gonna act like a shaming mechanism towards other people. It's kind of be like, Jupiter is gonna be like a parental figure, kind of like staring at you like, how dare you stare at my daughter like that, you know? Like, and this is the kind, you're gonna see, maybe I'm gonna talk about more examples, but so far the major one that I can remember is Kate Winslet. And it's, again, not like Kate Winslet is not an attractive woman, right? But people, as far as I've seen at least, right, she was not objectified. And even when she played roles where she was kind of showing skin and stuff, you didn't really see people talking about her like, oh my god, what a hoe, you know? Whereas other women maybe did less naked stuff in their lives, and maybe they have more prominent Lilith and they immediately get objectified for every little small thing that they do. Whereas, yeah, Jupiter is kind of like that great benefic that is just watching over the native, making sure that they don't get particularly objectified, or making sure that everyone else feels bad for even thinking about objectifying the Lilith native, because of that moralistic, you know, vibe that it has. And then there's also Mars, and one example that I can think about is Beyonce. And actually, Beyonce is an interesting character. I actually talked about, I was planning on talking about her. I actually wrote some things down about her, so I'm gonna save that for later, I think. Yeah, I'm just gonna continue with the general characteristics for these aspects for now. So back to, again, because I kept digressing, back to the mild to medium Lilith influence, right? So like I said, Lilith aspecting any other planet than the ones that I mentioned, trying the ascendant or the second house, the ascendant or second house lords. Lilith trying the Root Halagna, for instance, would also be a mild one. I would honestly, I know I said that Lilith in the Root Halagna can opposite. Yeah, no, let me just leave it like this. So I want to just mention a disclaimer that these are the general aspects that I have looked at to simplify things. But I stress this, everything is about looking at the big picture, all right? Because you can't look at mathematics you can't look at astrology like it's mathematics. It's not exactly the same, all right? I try to oversimplify it, and those of you who have watched my channel for a long time, you probably remember that I've done this before with other topics, and it's definitely useful, you know, to draw conclusions, but at the end of the day, astrology is a game of nuances, so you still have to look at the big picture, you know? You might have situations where, again, a person will take, let's say, 3 out of 5 for the first point, you know, maybe they'll have Lilith in the Root Halagna, and it's conjunct the Lord of the second house as well, and it's trine their moon and all that, conjunct their moon, right? But maybe they have Lilith conjunct Saturn. And so, to a large extent, maybe you won't see any of the sexiness or the projection happening. But instead, you may say other things, some other dark themes. Maybe they have struggles with authority and they run into people trying to control them or whatever, freedom issues, restriction issues, people demonizing them, etc., in negative ways, not because they're not being projected upon sexually, but projected upon with other negative shit, these are some things that I just wanted to mention. And then there's the third category, like I said, which is very important just to provide contrast to the people who are Lilith dominant, which are the people with no significant Lilith influence. And the way that I have defined these is simply by the fact that they have none of the previously mentioned aspects. All right. So no prominent Lilith aspects to the moon, the ascendant, to any of the major planets. But particularly none, especially when I looked at no prominent Lilith, I'm talking especially about the Lagna, the moon, right? Because these are the facial features. The moon and the second house, this is the face and the throat. The ascendant and the ascendant lord and Mars, these are the physical body. Okay? So when it comes to particularly this topic of being a sex symbol, being attractive, being projected upon with people's fantasies erotically and whatnot, these are the main things you want to look at. Okay, so things like conjunctions to, the sun. If the sun is not connected to the first or the second house, that's not particularly connecting to the person's physical appearance. It may still show in their aura a little bit, but it's not that strong, all right? However, with the no significant Lilith influence, I looked at people who had none of these, all right? And just to give you some examples right off the top of my head, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Johnny Depp, okay? Now, the reason, this is why I said they're important, and there's more of them, okay? I'm gonna get to examples later. At some point down the week, as the week progresses. I'm kidding. I don't know, whenever I get to it, okay? They are important just to show you that, number one, Lilith is not necessary in order to make a person attractive, okay? Because, hello, Johnny Depp, Grace Kelly, also Princess Diana, another big example, right? And what you see when you look at these examples that don't have any significant Lilith is that, first of all, they tended not to be seen as particularly sexy or sex symbol-ish, okay? Maybe debatable with Johnny Depp a little bit. Debatable with Grace Kelly, I think, maybe as well, but not really. I mean, they were seen as good looking. And also, I think, again, this is where I have to stress that it's a sign of the times, because, again, I think Grace Kelly, for instance, the way that she presented herself would probably not have gotten anywhere in today's world, because in today's world, like I said, most women are expected to be hypersexual, to show skin, to be, all over the place, to have silicone and Botox and all this stuff. And women back in those days, for instance, who were classy, controlled, had it together, did not show their sexuality at all. Those women back in those days, they were seen as attractive still. But in today's world, they're seen as boring. To a large extent. I'm not trying to say that there aren't examples even in today's world of women. Actually, another example that I was going to include is Kim Cattrall. And I think Kim Cattrall is a particularly important example because, hello, she played Samantha in Sex and the City. So you would think, holy shit, I mean... This is a woman who played this woman who's hypersexual, and yet she has no prominent Lilith placements, which kind of shows you, okay, yes, she is conventionally attractive. She still is attractive, even now. I think she's in her 50s now, or 60 or whatever. But she does not and did not have the Lilith vibe, all right? She was not the siren. She was not exactly the male fantasy type. Okay, maybe, and again, I'm not trying to say that some men didn't find her attractive, but not with the level of crazy intensity that the Lilith archetype creates, Compare Kim Cattrall, for instance, to Angelina Jolie, or Monica Bellucci. Compare her to Marilyn Monroe. And now some people might think, and this is where it's interesting. Again, this is how I got to this topic in the first place, like I said, because when you think about it, I mean, you can't actually pinpoint exactly what it is that, you know, makes some people, some women in particular, sex symbols, and other women not sex symbols. Even though you would, you know, if you were to look at them side by side, you would think these are both very good looking women. You know, they both have a nice physique, a nice shape. They speak in a nice way or something, and yet one of them will have, like, you know, a massive aura of magnetism and attraction, and the other one maybe is just going to be pretty, you know? Just pointing it out. Now, these are the three main categories that I looked at. Like I said, heavy Lilith, number 1. Second would be mild to medium Lilith. Number 3 category, no significant Lilith. And how I would characterize these, okay? The first category, the heavy Lilith, tend to be the most heavily projected upon, tend to be scapegoated, hated, desired at the same time, a lot of the times, especially when you look at them from the perspective of sexual attractiveness. Oftentimes, the main difference between the heavy Lilith types and the medium or the mild to medium Lilith archetypes or Lilith natives is that the heavy Liliths really cannot escape the projections. They cannot escape the attention that they get, often being sexualized, you know, often being projected upon, meaning that even if these people would dress, I don't know, in a potato. Funny enough, actually, I remember seeing this ages ago about Marilyn Monroe when they dressed her up in a potato sack just to prove that she's attractive no matter what. And she still looked hot in a potato sack. Like, just to give an example, right? And even when before she became famous, she was very attractive. Even when she was, like, all buttoned up, you know, dressed conservatively as possible, she was still a very attractive young woman. And that is to show you really this kind of energy where these people, even if they will wear like nothing but sweatpants, you know, they'll dress the most unattractive as possible. You know, the women will wear no makeup and they will still attract potentially unwanted attention because it's a vibe about them. It's a vibe, it's an energy, it's the animal magnetism thing that Lilith sort of projects. I don't know, projects or is projected upon, whatever. Then the second to medium, the mild to medium, which I would say the second category, like I said, these are people who have milder Lilith energy. These are people who they're also capable of exerting fascination, but not to the same degree of intensity most of the times. So either it will be that the level of magnetism is toned down, or they can switch it on and off at will. Like, for instance, just to give you an example, like, for instance, Julia Roberts, right? Julia Roberts, actually, I'm not sure if she was a mild Lilith or no Lilith. Let me just double check. Yes, so I have actually counted Julia Roberts as a mild, even though technically she has the Lord of the Second House in opposition to Lilith, but aside from that, she does not have a direct aspect from Lilith to the Ascendant, and she also has a pretty strong Saturn and a pretty strong Mars. So technically, again, this is why I said astrology is a game of nuances. I have looked at her as a mild Lilith because even though she does have some of those aspects listed in the first category, she has a lot of counterbalancing aspects that kind of tone down her Lilith energy. The main one, I think, being Saturn, because she has her Rudha Lagna in Virgo and it's opposite Saturn. So that right there tones down a lot of any potential sexiness that she might be projecting. And yet, despite that, okay, she still has enough sexiness, or had enough sexiness to portray the main role in Pretty Woman. And even when you think about that role, okay, it wasn't particularly, I mean, by today's standards, I think that role was like totally vanilla. But yeah, so it wasn't exactly like there was anything explicit going on or she was walking around naked or anything. And I think it was precisely because of this combination of like Lilith, but also with Saturn on top, that kind of gave her that ability to show a sort of very subdued sort of sexy that was presentable on the screen without making her seem, you know, over the top and like causing audiences to be distracted by how sexy she is. You know what I mean? Yeah, so the bottom line is Julia Roberts as an example, together with many others, like Vivian Leigh, another example that I have found in this mild to medium Lilith. Another one, Rudolph Valentino, which, to be honest, Rudolph Valentino, I would have expected him to have more Lilith, maybe because he was the first major male sex symbol, I think, in Hollywood. But he didn't, and yet he had a strong enough Lilith because it was trine his Moon-Jupiter conjunction. So again, especially for a man, that would have been it's strong enough to give him, you know, an edginess, a sort of, again, that sort of animal magnetism in addition to other things he had going for him, like I said, in the horoscope, because this is just one thing to look at in addition to other placements that would have made, that would make a person attractive. And yeah, so there's a bunch of people here in this category. Another one, Nicole Kidman, again, that I have considered to be a mild to moderate Lilith archetype. And these are the types that, again, they're capable of showing sexy, but they're not slave to it, you know? As in, they can turn it off, they can tone it down enough to where people don't notice this aspect of them, you know, if they really want to. Whereas the ones who have very strong Lilith energies, like I said in the first category, I feel like these are hurricanes, you know. If it's a first category hurricane of Lilith, LOL, then, you know, these types have no way of escaping it. It's like just there. People just know that this person is going to be sexy. They're going to stare at them, etc., so on and so forth. Yeah, whereas if it's a mild to moderate, they can turn it off at will. They can be sensuous, yeah, but not to the point where they will cause traffic accidents for the most part. And they also, most importantly, with this second category of a little bit of Lilith, but not too much, they still have the capacity to be respectable easily, to be taken seriously easily, because people are not overly distracted by their sexiness, basically. On the other hand, which again can be maybe in some ways a negative, but I mostly see it as a positive, they will also not inspire the same level of crazy obsessive attraction as the first category of Liliths tend to. But again, I would personally, I would see that as a positive, all right? But I guess, I don't know, maybe if you want to be a global sex symbol, then maybe it's best if you have as much Lilith as possible, I guess. And finally, the third category of people, which are the ones that don't have any prominent Lilith configurations or aspects, these are the ones that, you know, I would personally, again, I would say that these are quite lucky, in the sense that they tend to not necessarily be the targets of objectification. Attention, though, I want to open this parenthesis right now before I forget about it. I didn't mention anything about stalking, because stalking is something else, and actually there are specific configurations in astrology that tend to show stalkers or issues with stalkers. And I would say, unfortunately, that this Lilith thing has little to nothing to say about whether a person is likely to attract stalkers or not. It might be true that a person with a prominent Lilith might attract more attention, but that doesn't automatically mean that they will attract stalkers, and or that a person who doesn't have Lilith won't attract stalkers. And in fact, I have seen quite a few examples that have attracted stalkers even without prominent Lilith placements. So yeah, that's a separate thing. But yeah, going back to the topic of people who don't have prominent Lilith placements, they tend to not be targets of objectification, all right, unless they really want to. I think, again, another thing that I was thinking about just now, it would be probably an interesting experiment, but personally I have no inclination and no interest in doing this. But if anyone out there maybe has a lot of free time and has access to information about this, it would be fun to see about OF models and to see the ones at the top, because I would not be surprised if the ones that are the biggest earners would be people women in particular, because I heard it's mostly women. Who have prominent Lilith placements, and maybe the ones that are struggling are the ones who don't have prominent, because again, Lilith tends to create this kind of animal magnetism that makes people want to stare at them, especially again if they have Lilith connected to the physical body. People want to stare at their body, right? So again, maybe in some areas such as OF, or again, not trying to say obviously that anyone who has these placements would be drawn to these professions, definitely not. But unfortunately, like I said, because of these placements, they can be the targets of unwanted attention. And yeah, in some professions, again, if you want to be a model, an actor, anyone in the public eye where you have to be in the arts or something and people look at your body a lot or something, I guess it can be an advantage in some situations. Yeah, so the general positive of not having prominent Lilith aspects is to be seen as classy and respectable more naturally. And also when it comes to women, you will actually see that a lot of the times it's the women who don't have prominent Lilith that are seen as the good wife type, quote unquote, or the Madonna out of the Madonna whore complex. I'm not talking about the actual Madonna, of course, the singer who actually has moderate Lilith placements, unsurprisingly, I mean. But yeah, this is pretty much. However, and I've actually seen this just as I have mentioned the examples, right? So you could find people who don't have any prominent Lilith placements and they are drop dead gorgeous. I mean, breathtakingly beautiful, like symmetrical, perfect smiles, whatever. But they won't have that edginess. They won't have that, animal sort of attraction that makes people really stare at a Lilith archetype, all right? Which, again, is not a bad thing. If anything, it's mostly a positive, like I said. But it explains, going back to the original reason why I started this topic, it explains why, some people maybe who are not even that particularly attractive make it really big, for instance, in show business, because they attract a lot of attention, whereas others may struggle even though they're very, very good looking and they take good care of themselves and all that, right? And these are things that are, to the naked eye, they are invisible because you're talking about energies here. Lilith is not a physical point. And also, something that I should have mentioned maybe from the beginning is that there is no actual, Lilith look, It's not like the other astrological configurations or placements where you can actually sort of see the physical effects of that point or placement, on that person, so I'm at a point right now where I tend to kind of figure out when someone has Venus in the ascendant, for instance, or when they have Mars aspecting the first or the second house, because there are some common characteristics, physical traits that you see with these placements. But Lilith is not a tangible point, and I think that's precisely why you can't actually pinpoint specific features that you would say, oh, there it is, the Lilith feature. It's more like a vibe. What I can tell you in general is that, Lilith on the face, for instance, on the feminine Lilith that I was talking about, on the moon, on the second house, it tends to make a seductive face. It's not one or two features, it's the whole vibe. They just have this, I don't know, the best way that I can call it is like the Jessica Rabbit sort of effect. Think of all the famous actresses who have, like, Angelina Jolie, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Megan Fox, Eva Green, for instance. A lot of very famous, especially male fantasy sort of actresses, have prominent Lilith on the moon or the second house, which rules the face, And they tend to have something like an expression in their eyes that is very seductive. And usually there's like a witchy aura, like a witchy, bewitching sort of vibe, you know, that kind of lures people in. But it's a vibe. It's not something physical that you can, you know, you can actually pinpoint like, oh, that person, like, it's a, you know, it's not like a color of the iris or a shape of the eye or anything like that, you know, it's a vibe. And the same thing with the, like I said in the beginning with or towards the beginning about Lilith on the ascendant, it's an aura, it's an animal magnetism. It's like their bodies are, you know, like emanating something. I don't even know how to explain it, but again, if you look at a lot of famous people who have prominent Lilith on the, and I'm going to talk about more examples as I go along, as the week progresses, like I said. And, you know, you're going to see like a lot of these people who have prominent Lilith on the body. It's like there's just something about their body that makes them, they just have a physical presence that is intense. Their bodies oftentimes are very attractive, like I said, even when they're not perfect, you know, it's that same sort of vibe, that same sort of energy that I think comes from the Lilith energy that makes them attractive and appealing and magnetic again. And all right, this is, I'm thinking I'm gonna stop right here, and this is gonna be like the part 1 of the series because I have a shit ton of more information to share. And like I said, a very long list of examples, so I'm still have to figure out how I'm gonna present the examples as well, because I would like to show the charts, the roughly 70 or more charts that I have looked at just in the past few days. Yeah, but this is so far, this is the introductory part. And what I'm gonna do next, this is like I feel like I'm doing some kind of series, like a TV series or something, coming up in the next episode. Seriously, in the next episode though, what I'm gonna be talking about are the main configuration. So I have actually looked at the main configurations, yeah. So what I'm going to be talking about are some more examples and how it plays out for women versus men, and the more into specific examples of how Lilith can mix with other planets, as I have mentioned before, like for instance Beyonce's horoscope, which is interesting, as well as a bunch of other famous women that I've looked at, and well, I haven't seen any men with these ones in particular, but I may find men as well. But yeah, for instance, how Lilith mixes with other planets to produce archetypes that are interesting in the sense that they're both Lilith-dominant and yet they somehow manage to avoid being overly objectified, or they express other Lilith archetypes instead of being sexual or like focusing on exploiting their own sexuality. They tend to become aggressive feminist icons or something. Yeah, so I'm going to talk more about that in the next episode. Hopefully the next one will be the final, all right? But this one I feel is long enough already, so yeah. Thank you very much, again, if you have listened, and yeah, I hope that you have enjoyed all of this information. I'm going to try to add timestamps as much as possible, but really it is a jumbled video because, to be honest, I mean, it's impossible to really, I kept thinking about how I can organize it in a way that is like, you know, short and to the point and clear cut, but there's no way, because I keep coming up with, you know, examples connected to different things. I have to connect examples in between them. You know, this is the way it is. So yeah, just bear with me. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope you will enjoy the next part in the series as well. Bye.